Good evening, Rod here at A Better Way to Farm. Thanks for tuning in. You know, we spend our time trying to figure out answers, trying to figure out how to make things better, make things more profitable, and bring you valid, pertinent information. So today I had to go to Burlington and take care of some stuff. And on my way up, as I crossed a river and was going out across this bottom field, I realized that some guy there had baled his corn stalks and he didn't get them removed. The river's not out yet, but even though that was the case, there was about probably 20 acres out of the 40 that was a low spot, and that 20 acres had water that was up probably at least halfway on the bales. And it really got me thinking about this year. I talked to Travis in South Dakota, and I know they haven't turned a tap yet, and I've talked to several different people, multiple, guys saying, yeah, we got 3,000 acres to do and we've harvested 60. We've got 5,000 acres to do and we've harvested 90. And I know that there's a lot of things going on out there and some anxiety. I know that this is exceedingly unusual. Heaven help the guy that has those stock bales that are, I don't even know what you would do with those now other than run a shredder and run them back through a shredder and spread them for mulch. But as you start looking at the year, every year is different and every year has its challenges. And every year has its high points and its low points, and this will pass. It'll freeze, it'll firm up, we'll get there, we'll get it done. And I just want to encourage you to hang on, don't freak out, don't overreact, and keep the faith, I guess is the big thing. But are we hitting a floating target? Are we aiming for a floating target? And I guess that, in all of agriculture, it's kind of hard to figure out what the target is sometimes. We're trying to figure out what we need to be doing and and everything plays in together. And this year, with it being so wet over most of the United States here in the fall, it's really making it challenging. So then, in today's society, with the internet and with all the things that we do, oftentimes we start looking for information. And that's what really, as I was driving across that bridge and down across that bottom and looking at those fields, I thought, man, the guys really don't have a lot that they can do right now. And so they're home reading and they're trying to gather information and figure things out. Here's what I want to encourage. Let's make sure what we're studying is relevant. Sometimes we just gather tons and tons of information that doesn't translate into anything that can help us. We get these guys that sit around and they talk about theory and they talk about, well, we think it ought to be this and we ought to do that and we ought to go this way. And none of it translates into profit for you. And so we want to make sure that what we're studying, the things that we're talking about, the people we're listening to, are actually putting us not on a target that is completely of no value, but on a target that does have value to us. So let me give you some examples of some things I have to wonder about being valid information together. We had someone ask, and it's a really good question. They said, do you think your soil testing should be done by soil types? Now, we've all looked at soil maps, and I know that, there's all kinds of little circles and figure eights, and there's so much of this type and so much of that type, and then 60 feet of this type, and it curves out through there. Well, in theory, it'd be awesome to test every field by soil type and see exactly what's there. Reality says we're not going to plant that field by soil type. We're not going out in a 160 acre field and doing one of these numbers through it and then reloading our planter and our starter tanks and going again this way, and then this one here, this soil type peels off over here, went up with 9,000 point rows and 0 straight rows that go through the field. And so if we have anomalies, yes, we want to test those separate. If we've got some problem area and we're trying to figure out what we've got to do to fix that, absolutely. Do we want a grid sample? Yes, if we're managing pH and trying to get our calcium dialed in. For us, if you watch Dan and I do the video here Sunday evening, we were talking about the fact, though, that here's what we know. We're going to load the planter at this end of the field with starter and micros, and we're going clear to the other end. And we're going to turn around and we're going to come back. And we're going to continue that process until we run 40 acres or 80 acres out. And then we're going to reload. And so for what we're doing, with the exception of anomalies, we're going to test that like in 40 acre blocks, 20 or 40 acre blocks. Because the information that we gather has to be relative. I can learn everything about every soil type in my field, and I can spend thousands and thousands of dollars and then have nothing that I can do with that information. Nothing that has ever been proven to be profitable, nothing that will help me make more money. So that's one of the examples of things that I think that sometimes we study that we don't necessarily come to fruition on profit. Let's talk about what we can study. Let's talk about some of the things that are really relevant this year. Let's talk about the things that have already been studied and we can just read and know what happens when water stands on soil for prolonged periods of time. We know that the mycorrhiza bacteria take a beating. We know their numbers get depressed. We know that it kills them in hordes. And we know, therefore, that come springtime, we're not going to have the mycorrhiza going to work to make the phosphorus available to get into that plant. We know that any year following a flood or following a great amount of standing water, that we know we need to replace starter. And there are countless articles written on that, countless studies that have been done, and it translates into money for you. And so that's something that we can do. We talked a lot about, how to, in our proper soil testing, one of the things I touched on was we talked about the fact of how dry does it need to be. I can remember 25 years ago, guys pulling soil tests, and if they had a really understanding, loving wife who really was into agriculture, they'd bring that soil in that was too wet, and they would maybe put it on cookie sheets and dry it in the oven. And I don't know how that affected the validity of the test or anything of the sort. I just know that lots of people did it. Today, with the new machinery that Midwest Labs has, with the new extraction methods that they use, we know that that moisture doesn't hurt us, that we don't get adverse results. Now, we don't want to send in goo with water running out of it. That is correct, but we're not going to be able to get in the field to pull those anyway. But we can send in dirt that is very, very, very moist as long as we can get it to mix. That's the main thing, is that if we're doing a 20-acre field, we get 20 cores, we get them in the bucket, we get it mixed really, really well so that we can get an actual sample that's indicative of what we have out there so we can make good decisions. So that's something that we know that we can do, some information that we know we can use, something that will turn into cash for you, and we're fully aware of that. Guys, nitrogen management is truly a moving target. It moves every year because it is dependent upon temperature, it's dependent upon moisture, it's dependent upon a lot of things. And I think for the lion's share of us, we really are going to have to rethink what we're going to do about fall applied in. You guys, if you follow this page, you know we are not fans of anhydrous. You know we are not fans of fall applied nitrogen. Period, end of story. And we have a lot of reasons for that and a lot of data for it. However, this year, I'm going to throw aside what our preferences are and just say, let's get real for a minute. It's way too wet. And every time we go through that soil, we're going to pack it down and we're going to make compaction to who laid the rail. And we're going to have to go get the crop. We know that. Now, some of it may wait till it freezes, but we're going to have to go get it. And the temptation is going to be there to go get it when it's way, way, way too wet. We don't want to double down and come back on something else that causes compaction, run a bunch of equipment over that field, pack that soil down, and then apply in abnormally high moisture conditions, because abnormally high soil moisture only lends itself to a lot more nitrogen loss. I know that we're sitting back and we're watching some things that are exceedingly uncomfortable. I do not like the fact that every time I pick up a magazine, every time I open an internet article, every time I look at anything in ag, they're talking about how the suppliers are raising prices. And it's very troublesome to me to see what's happening there and how we are basically in a situation where there should be an antitrust lawsuit filed, but it's a Canadian corporation causing the problems. I don't know how that's going to shake out. But I know that inputs are going up, and I know that we're going to have to manage our dollars really tightly. And I really have to question if applying nitrogen right now is going to be of great value. And I just want to encourage you to always remember this, guys. Everything that happens in agriculture is good for somebody. Everything. I fear that fall applied nitrogen is going to be good for the people that are selling it to you. I don't think it necessarily is going to be very good for you. So I just want you to be very intentional in what you do. I want you to think about how we're going to make sure we're doing the right things, and then come back and say, all right, this is what we want to do, and here's why. It's not here's what we want to do because we've done it that way for 30 years. It's here's what we want to do because of this. Because we have these 5 compelling reasons that drive us to do this, whatever this is. And so guys, just be real intentional. Instead of gathering a bunch of information and reading a bunch of theory that never turns into cash, let's spend our time thinking about what it is that we can do. What are the right things that we can do? What's the top 5 things that each one of us can do in our operation to make sure we make as much money as we can this year, and then make as much money as we can in 19, and that we don't do anything in 18 that spills over into additional negative income in 19. So that being said, hopefully we've given you something to think about here tonight. We'll be coming back at you. We got a whole list of things that we want to talk about. We appreciate you guys tuning in. I hope that it dries up for all of us and becomes a little nicer and a little more firm, and we get a little sunshine, and that we can get serious about this harvest. The temptation when we get to harvesting is to push too hard and take chances. Let's don't do that, guys. Be safe. We want to be able to come back at you live next week too. Thanks.